Which candidate for New York City mayor has a platform that most aligns with your values? We're going to be looking at the candidates' platforms and policy proposals and do some comparing and contrasting. This is Nuance, and I am Mike Scala, an attorney, and I'm joined by fellow hip hop artist Timid, also known as Jay Carter. He's the chair of BLM Tokyo. What's going on with this, Jay?
Yeah, I think it's that season right now. We need to find out what the candidates are standing for and what they're talking about. So hopefully we can get some comments and some participation. We want to hear from everybody that's listening and watching to get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Last week, we kind of set this up, right? That we would be looking at these candidates' platforms. I think we mentioned that oftentimes the coverage doesn't seem to be enough on actual policy proposals, right? We hear the rhetoric, we hear messaging, which can be good as well, but maybe not enough on the nuts and bolts that voters perhaps should be looking at, right? If you, as a voter, have certain priorities and values that you want to see the candidates aligned with, well, maybe there should be more coverage on that. Maybe the candidates themselves should be doing more to put that
Mhm.
front and center.
Right, right, right. Absolutely, absolutely.
So
So,
we had a poll last week. Do you want to look at that first before we start diving into the individual candidates?
sure, we can go ahead and get into the poll. So last week we kind of touched on this idea as well. So the question last week was, should candidates and campaigns focus more on policy ideas than they currently do? Actually, let me get the full thing. Do you believe that candidates and campaigns should focus more on policy ideas than they currently do? Um, and the results we had for the poll, now to be to be to be honest, I got this up a little bit late, so we're kind of light on votes here, but 67% says yes, 33% say no.
Now,
But there's no justification. There yet to be
right.
any comments on why there might be a no response there. You would think that everyone would want to hear more about policy.
Yeah, that kind of confuses me. I wonder why some people are saying no. Do they think that we hear too much on policy? Do they think it's just not important that the rhetoric or what they stand for symbolically matters more than their actual ideas at this point, right? I would be interested to hear why some people don't want to hear policy.
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, there are no responses as yet.
Well, we'll
Um,
keep an eye on that as the show
yeah.
progresses, right? We'll see what people say.
Yeah.
So we did mention one of the candidates does seem to be defining himself more in terms of his ideas, right? In this mayoral primary, certainly here in New York City. And that would be the assembly member from Queens, Zohran Mamdani. So I thought maybe we would start by looking at his website to get a sense of what he's actually pushing forward, because, like we said, he seems to be the, for lack of a better term, ideas candidate right now. And then once we see what he's pushing, we can look at the other candidates and see, are they having similar ideas? Are they really shying away from details? Because he does seem to be going in on that front. And then we could also, of course, discuss whether we agree or disagree with what he's saying.
Sounds good to me. Let's do it.
All right, let's pull this up. And I wanted to go into it somewhat blind here so we can react to it in real time. All right. So
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
going to Google the
And
candidate's name.
yeah, the only
Voters should
thing
be doing, right?
the only thing that we've looked at, or at least that on the show, was
Mm-hmm.
that debate that he
Sure.
took part in. Where I remember, he kind of came off in ahead of some of the other candidates.
He did
Uh,
present well at the debate. And I think we mentioned he didn't do a whole lot, maybe ironically or perhaps wisely on his part for that debate. He didn't do a whole lot of defining himself in terms of ideas, right? I think he was speaking in broader strokes even at that debate.
yeah, yeah. I think my impression from that debate was a lot of people were kind of pandering, and it kind of made sense in a way because it wasn't a general audience debate. They were debating in front of a union, and so it seemed like they were basically trying to speak directly to the people in that union.
Right. But
Yeah.
even so, right, you get these questions. you should be able to answer them with some specificity, I would think. Now, of course, I think oftentimes a deliberate choice is made not to, right? Because maybe you
Sure.
don't want to upset people. You're trying to appeal to a broader electorate here in New York City. But
Right, right.
it's interesting to me when you have a candidate like this who is the DSA endorsed candidate, right? He seems to be unabashedly on the far left here. But if you watch that debate performance, for example, you might not have even known that, right? Even he seemed to be uh, not moderating his policy so much, but maybe not giving you all the details of his policy for a reason.
Right, right, right.
So I'm on his site right now. This is Zohran for NYC.com, and we're going to click on platform at the top, right? So we get to see what the candidate himself now is pushing. Right on top, it says Zohran Mamdani is running for mayor to lower the cost of living for working class New Yorkers. Okay, so leading with the messaging.
And that's a message that I think is should resonate. We talked about here several times about how that poll or that kind of study came out that over 50% of New Yorkers weren't able to even meet basic needs. So this is something I would think anyone running for mayor needs to be talking about.
Absolutely. But the focus here for the purpose of this episode is going to be on concrete policy proposals. So I want to be able to separate the rhetoric from the policy. And I'm actually scrolling down, even on his site, the campaign is for every person who believes in dignity. Okay. Again, rhetoric, you got to meet Zohran. Now I clicked on platform. I'm still scrolling down. I don't know if you're on his site as well, Jay. I'm
I
still
am.
scrolling down. Meet Zohran. Okay, great. But we're looking for a platform. It does say Democratic Socialist running for mayor. So you get more, I guess, of an idea of where he might stand. But again, we're looking for his very specific policy proposals. And I think
Well,
it is telling. This is telling right away, right before we even get to it. We're scrolling down on his platform page, and we said he was the ideas candidate. He's the one who's defining himself in terms of policy. And even on his site, you guys scroll down and down and down before you get to his actual policy points.
well, there is. I don't see if it's that far of a scroll though. Like it's right at it's
Hold on a
not the
second.
very top, but if you
Hold on a second.
click platform, the
Yeah,
very
I did. I'm on the platform page.
it's all one page.
I think that's what it is because I'm looking at the top here in the web bar. It's Zohran for NYC.com/hashtag platform, which is an indication that it's not a separate page.
Right.
It's the one page, and then he's
Right.
got sections on the page. But even so, when you click it, it should take you
It
to
does. At least
okay.
for me.
I think you know what it was. It took a minute for mine to load, and so when I was clicking on platform, it was still showing the top of the page. I'm like, here's his picture. He's running for mayor. He's got his bio, but where's the actual platform that I clicked on? Okay, volunteer. But okay, fair enough.
Okay, so
But even on a page though, right? If you scroll down, like we said, there are these different sections. Even the volunteer is here, but you gotta scroll down, I guess, halfway through the page to get to the meat and bones.
right. So we got a platform here and he's got it laid out in several points here.
Yes.
Um and the section title is New York is too expensive. Zoran will lower costs and make life easier. That's a bold claim, with a will statement.
A chicken in every pot.
Right, like a will statement is. I know you got to promote it in that way, but
Yeah.
will is a very, very tough statement to live up to
Would
because,
you have preferred we'll fight to or something like that? We'll work to?
yeah, I think that's a little bit less rhetoric and more of a reality.
Right,
Um,
because we have to make clear that the mayor is not a king.
right.
You still have to work with the city council, right?
Mhm.
Agencies, and obviously you have a lot of control here in New York, and you can put people in various positions to help further your agenda. But
Right.
there still are checks and balances. There are still laws, state laws, right? Oftentimes, Albany needs to give you authorization to do things in the city, and so to your
Mhm.
point, just to say, if you make me mayor, I will lower your costs and make your life easier. Well, it takes more than just one person.
Right, absolutely. So the first, I mean, you want to go through each of these points?
Yeah, we don't need to look at the entire website here. I guess we can pick out the major ones. He starts off with freeze the rent, which I know has been a big part of his platform. And even at that debate, that topic came up, right? I think it was a raise your hand if you agree. that we should freeze the rent. He obviously did. Some of the candidates did and some did not. Now we're talking about for stabilized apartments, not for everyone in the city.
Right. So I think that's kind of a misnomer in that regard because it only applies to stabilized apartments,
Yes,
which the majority of people aren't in stabilized apartments. Um,
correct. 9%,
according to
right? Is that
this,
what,
it seems like 2 million people.
okay.
So
Oh, no, I misread that. So it said here Eric Adams has allegedly handpicked appointees to the rent guidelines board to jack up rents on stabilized apartments by 9% and counting. So
right,
he's saying that it's gone up 9% in this
right,
administration, and he wants it to be at 0%, right? He wants it frozen.
right. And it's saying here that 2 million people live in rent stabilized apartments in New York, and so he wants to freeze that there. Now, does the mayor have the power to do that on his own?
No, no,
Because
absolutely
he
not.
says the mayor has the power to change that.
Not unilaterally, right? But
Right.
like, I guess his approach here is he talked about how Eric Adams handpicked appointees to the rent guidelines board. So I'm assuming if he were to get in there, he would want to put his own people on there who would have a
Right.
different agenda.
Yeah.
Now, this is an interesting number though. 2 million. That's actually higher than I would have guessed, right? Because 2 million people, what is the current population of New York City? Is about 9 million right now. We can look it up. I know it was
I
8
think
million
it's
for a while,
I think it's
and then
something
it
like
went up
that.
to like 8.5, 9, right? And then there are people probably not even counted. So whatever it says is probably a little bit higher than that. So let's say 9 million.
8.2
So two out
million.
of nine people. Say it again.
8.2 million.
That's the official
Um,
count. All right, let's say it's
as of 2023, I think that was the
all right.
last
So
official
let's say
count.
it's 8.5 million, right? So you do,
Million. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So let's say two divided by 8.5. That's like almost 25% of New Yorkers, according to this, live in rent stabilized apartments.
Right. So I mean that could make a major impact if it could make a major impact. So I think it's something worth pushing for.
And it's concrete policy, right? It's kind of the
Yeah.
bedrock of his campaign. So there is that. All right, let's
Okay.
move on to the next point here. Again, we're not going to cover every single one because we have other candidates to look at as well. But his next point here is fast, fare free buses. So that's interesting. Fare free, right? Because the first sentence here is public transit should be reliable, safe, and universally accessible. But
Right.
that can mean a few different things. He's saying fare free, right? Meaning you wouldn't
Right.
have to pay at all to get on the bus. He says he'll permanently eliminate the fare on every city bus. So is this overpromising as well? Is this realistic? I mean,
Well, it
it's
says
only
in that
gold.
if you look in that second paragraph, it says Zohran won New York's first fare-free bus pilot on 5 lines across the city. So it sounds like, and you could probably speak to this a little bit better
Yeah.
than I can, but it sounds like he's kind of tested this program and in real
Well,
time.
but it's a pilot on 5 lines, right? And so if you try to expand that to the entire system, the
Right.
economics are going to be a lot different, right? As opposed to just saying
Sure.
we're going to make this bus free for a limited time. In theory, you're still collecting fares from everyone else, although we know that's a big problem as well. The fare
Right.
evasion.
Right. Now, there are a few points listed here that I see that seem a little overpromising.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Of course, eliminating the fare on every city bus, I think that's a big task. Like you said, the economics. But then he also said he wants to make them faster by rapidly building priority lanes. Now, the issue
Oh
I
my
have
God.
with that is where you get the extra space for those priority lanes.
You don't. You take away space from other drivers. And I just got a ticket. I wanted to bring this up. I should have had it with me, but there's a video that the city is relying on for this ticket, and I'm fighting it because they're
Right,
saying I went into the bus lane illegally, right? But the video doesn't show what I did after I went into the bus lane. I went into the bus lane to make the next right turn, which is legally what you're allowed to do. I mean, how else are you
right,
going to do it? If the bus lane is in between you and the right turn you're trying to make, you have to pass through the bus lane to make that turn, right? And the video cuts off as soon as I get into the lane and I'm about to leave the lane, but doesn't show that I make that next turn there. And this is
It
what you're
sounds like
seeing, and this is a camera, right? It's not like a cop, and that's the disadvantage now to not having a real person looking to see what you're doing. These
right.
cameras are just gonna take a picture, take a video of you, and automatically fire off a ticket without getting into the circumstances. And I even argued that that camera, as it was set up, could never sustain a ticket because it never shows what the car is doing
Right.
after they leave the lane, right? But the
Right.
camera's on the back of the bus, so it depends on the bus's vantage point.
Right. Well, it sounds like we need to get Zoran on the phone and handle this.
But no, but see, I don't think Zoran would be on our side here. I think he wants more bus lanes and fewer cars. I think he wants to probably ticket drivers into oblivion.
That's speculation there, sir. That's we
Listen,
don't have any we're looking at the policy here. That's speculation. We don't know
it's
for
not
sure.
speculation because I know more than what I'm seeing on the website. And I
Okay, okay,
also
okay.
want to mention something else on here because you were asking before if the mayor would have the power to do all of these things. Right here, right on his own website, he said he won New York's first fair free bus pilot, right? He won it.
Right.
Well, what is his position now? He's an assembly member. That's a state position, state level position. And
Hmm.
so he is now taking credit for something he did at the state level, right?
Hmm.
Which again further emphasizes if he were to become mayor, he wouldn't be able to do these things on his own. He'd be turning to his partners, for example, in state government to try to get these things done, as he is saying that he did in the state government.
Well, if he was, well, perhaps having that experience in state government, he might have the partners that are willing to work with him to actually make this a reality.
Why do you
It-
say that?
Oh, well, you said if he did this while he was in state government, then he shifts into becoming mayor, and he has to work with those people that he worked with previously. Then it might make it, wouldn't it make it easier potentially to get this done in New York City?
Because he's done some of it, you're saying, already at the state level.
Right,
The
and
thing
work with some of
is,
the people that has done it.
yeah, but the question is if he leaves his seat in the assembly, who's going to take it over and what is the makeup of the assembly going to be and how
Right, right,
friendly is that body on the whole going to be to a socialist mayor in New York City? Let's not forget there are state level officials all throughout New York, and New York on the whole is not a socialist state. You know what I mean? And so you're
right,
going to be working with people upstate, for example, who often get elected on the premise that New York City is too liberal, right? Oh, these mayors in New York City and whatever city council, they're doing too
right,
much to move us to the left and they're affecting our quality of life upstate or Long Island or wherever. And
right,
so oftentimes you see pushback at the state level against what the city is pushing for, right? And I think you would see that especially be the case if you were to somehow get a socialist mayor in New York City, which, by the way, is a long shot in itself because as
right,
non-socialist as the state is, the city isn't even, and maybe the city can get away with being a little bit more progressive, but
right,
still, if you look at the poll numbers, you see that the electorate of the city isn't there either.
right. Okay, well, that's
So,
another point here.
all right, let's
Um,
go down to city-owned grocery stores. I think this one is really controversial for some, right? Um,
this
people
definitely leans into
I
socialism
would say more so, right?
category.
Now you're even probably flirting with communism when you start talking about having the government run businesses. So food prices are out of control. Nearly 9 in 10 New Yorkers say the cost of groceries is rising faster than their income. So I think most people can get with that premise, right? We
Sure.
cover this here as well. The question becomes, how do you address it? And the plan here that he is proposing is to create a network of city owned grocery stores focused on keeping prices low, not making a profit. So the idea is they won't pay rent or property taxes. And so that will reduce overhead and the savings will be passed on to shoppers. Perhaps that would happen, but what would happen to all the mom and pop stores in the city, bodegas, corner stores, everyone who tries to open up their own business? How will they be able to compete with a government run grocery store?
Right. And I think that's a good question to ask. At this, that's a really good question to ask. And then it raises a question itself, like, will this give the citizens relief versus, leaving the open market for small businesses to compete?
Right.
Right? If we leave the current system in place and people can't afford it, even though the small businesses are able to exist, it doesn't help the rest of the people. If we put this in place and you got lower prices for the people and the small businesses can't compete, but we're helping the people,
Except the
is this a better
people,
option?
except the people can't now run their own small business, at least not in this space as readily, right? And
Yeah,
so
but
a
the
lot of the
majority
people
of
will have
people
less
aren't.
money.
But the majority of people aren't running a small business. They're going to work and
Sure.
they're trying to afford their life. So it's like, which one
Oh,
do you?
but okay, but they might work at those grocery stores as well. They might work in those small businesses.
Well, I'm sure the workers are getting paid.
Not if the businesses can't compete.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, if it's
That's
going
just
to
true.
force, and is that what you want to do to the dynamic of New York City? You want to force all the mom and pop stores out of business? I don't think so. Is that just going to
No,
basically open the door for more corporations to come in? Like you only have to be a big corporation or a government-owned grocery store to exist in the city. I mean,
right.
that's transformative in a way I don't know that we want to go down.
That's a fair point as well. But at the same time, not a but at the same
Yeah,
time, we also have to look at, the affordability for those New Yorkers. It says here, nearly 9 in 10 say it's right. Cost is rising faster than their income. So
agreed.
the current system isn't working for New
Sure,
York.
but would 9 in 10 New Yorkers agree with the government takeover of grocery stores? I don't think so. I would bet money that
If it's
that would
if
be an
it's more
extremely
affordable,
that would be an extremely unpopular idea. That yeah, affordability, but that's the only way to address affordability. Having the government run the store? Are you kidding me?
I'm just saying that I think some
What
people
about more
might.
tax breaks? Right? What about fewer fines against these business owners? I mean, there
Right,
are a
right,
lot of things
sure.
that you could do. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Even just
sure.
smarter investments in the infrastructure of the city. Right? Like when we talk about transportation, helping people to get around,
Sure.
more money in their pockets. You know what I mean? Time is money. So there's a lot you could do to improve affordability. The answer doesn't have to be the government has to take over all business. Like, again,
Sure.
that's something that's going to be extremely unpopular, I believe, just in principle with most New Yorkers.
I think in principle, you're absolutely right. That idea that the government's going to take over the grocery stores will be unpopular. I think at the same time, we also look at, like you said, there are some other options that could potentially put more money in people's pockets so they can be able to afford these things. But I think we also have to think about the 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 psychology of them looking at those prices, even if they've got a little bit more money in their pocket, those prices still look too high. They still look like they're being
Right.
squeezed, and so they're still going to feel burdened in that regard as well. So this is an interesting proposal. Uh,
I think it's
don't know if
most
it'll be.
revealing. Honestly, this is probably the most controversial point, right,
Mm,
on his platform here. And I think it's most revealing about his political philosophy, right? I mean,
mm,
if you're comfortable with this, it's kind of like a litmus test, right? If you're comfortable with this, he may be your candidate. You know what I mean? But if you look at this and you're like, ooh, I don't know what this is going to do to the character of New York City. We don't want the government to take over our business. Then he's
right.
probably not your guy, right? Because this is kind of, what he's all about. This is the kind of idea he's pushing, and he is not shy about it. And that's the thing. I've seen him before. To his credit, he did come to a Queens Link press conference that we did. He supports that. I'm happy that he supports that, right? But he likes to say he's not afraid of being called a socialist. In fact, there was a heckler at the press conference who got in his face, and I think it was, I don't know if it was a Cuban immigrant, but it was a Hispanic guy who kept yelling "Comunista, Comunista" at him. And he said, "Listen, I don't shy away from that." He said, "I'm a socialist." So, this is what he was saying at the press conference in
Right.
response to the heckler. But he wasn't afraid of those words. You know what I mean?
Right.
He's kind of unabashedly that. And some people want that. I don't think most voters do, and I think the polls bear that out. But at least he is showing you and telling you who he is and what he's trying to do.
And I think that's a good thing to know where the candidate stands instead of a candidate that's going to be there and say, I do this, I want this, and then when they get in office, they do something different. If he's
Right.
letting you know up front, then you know this is what you're voting for. He wants city-owned grocery stores.
Right.
If that's what you're into, then this is the guy that you're going for.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so this is, and I think it's an interesting proposal. I don't know how it would work economically, but and to be fair, there's a link to a New York Times article which I assume
Mhm.
goes a little bit deeper into how this program works. So we haven't read that. So, you know,
Right. So that is good that on his platform page or the platform section of his website, he does have read more links after
yes,
his ideas, and they go to
yes,
different external sites. So, like you mentioned, there's a New York Times article on that one. You have a City and State article here. You've got,
right,
looks like, a WNYC radio appearance. And so he's linking to external media where he goes into more depth or there's more information presented, I guess, on each of these
Right.
points. So
What I
that's fine.
like about that, what I like about that is that by linking to external sources, you're not getting campaign propaganda or rhetoric. You're getting third party
Well, you might be though,
assessments.
because it could be
Yeah,
an
but
interview that he did with that publication or him explaining it himself. But you're right; it is third party. It isn't just his own website.
right, right, right. So,
Yeah.
okay. So let's what are we gonna move
Let's
on to
scroll
now?
down here. Like I said, we're not going to do them all. I want to look at this one because this is interesting. Baby baskets for New York's newborns. I mean, is he trying to buy the the baby vote here? What's going on? I like the gesture behind it, and in this one, maybe
What is the
I don't know
baby
what
back?
baby basket. So he's again focusing in on the cost of living, and that does seem to be his theme here, right? So all of these ideas are
The rent
centered
is too
around,
damn high. Where's
right?
my guy? Where's my guy
That's
at?
what he's saying. He's saying that the cost of living is too high, and we need to bring prices down and provide economic relief to New Yorkers. And so this one here focuses in on the cost of starting a family, right? Raising a
Right,
baby, and he's talking about 90 similar programs around the world where they provide new parents and guardians with essential
right.
goods and resources. They're
Yeah.
talking about diapers, baby wipes, nursing pads, postpartum pads, swaddles, even books. So, like I said, that's a good gesture. I'm not opposed to that. I guess you want to look at the cost and look at the
Sure.
economics of it. But if it helps people get off to a good start, why not, right? I guess a question here you might want to ask is, does it have to be funded directly from the city, or would you be able to cover this through nonprofits? Maybe a way is to invest more in some of these organizations that are already doing work like that around the city.
Right. And he did note that there are programs around the world that do something similar. And here in Japan, they actually do something like that
Yeah.
because Japan's facing a severe birthing crisis, and they reimburse costs of up to about, I think about $4,000 worth for newborns. So, or at least you're eligible for costs, and then you might even get a cash payment of like a couple $100 or something like that.
So that reminds me,
So,
I just did a trivia at Near's Tavern here. Shout out to Near's Tavern. And one of my questions was, which state in the US has a form of universal basic income already? Do you know the answer to that?
uh, you know what?
It
I
isn't
sound
quite
like I do, but
okay.
I don't remember. Go
You could
ahead.
probably guess because it isn't quite universal basic income. It's more like a stipend that's provided or an incentive for you to live in that state.
Oh, well, it's probably something like Montana or something.
Well, close. It's Alaska.
Okay. Yeah,
I
yes, I knew
believe
that.
I
See, I
believe
knew
that's
that.
funded by oil money. I think it's
I
from the
knew that.
oil in Alaska. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
knew that. I
So
knew that.
everyone there, I believe, gets on average about $1,600 from the state just to live there.
Right. Right. I knew that. I knew that. So,
Yeah. So yeah,
well,
so interesting.
well, he at the bottom of this point
Yeah.
about these baby baskets, he said uh this program would cost less than $20 million a year.
Okay.
So, yeah.
But again, is that going to be funded directly from the city, or is it a
Yeah.
matter of investing in nonprofits? Because, like we said, there are groups that do things like this already. Maybe you just want to
Yeah.
sponsor them to a greater degree, right? Make sure they're well funded.
Right. So
All right.
interesting.
Well, yeah, we did say he was the guy who was putting forth ideas, or at least focusing his campaign more on that, whether you agree with them or not. For
Right.
me, I agree with the general premise of lowering the cost of living. I wouldn't co-sign the specific policy proposals he is advocating in most cases, but at least he is doing that. Let's take a look at Andrew Cuomo, who in the polls is the front runner. I'm on his website now, andrewcuomo.com, and I'm going to click on issues, and let's see how his ideas compare and contrast. Is he going into that same level of specificity even, or is he keeping it more vague?
Right. Right.
So interestingly, the first thing you see on his site again is affordability, right? And so now we see really the
Right.
top two candidates in a Democratic primary making that their main topic, affordability. He says New York City faces a crisis of affordability. Our city has always been expensive, but today it is rapidly becoming unaffordable for millions of hardworking New Yorkers at all income levels. Okay. So
Right.
now,
He's got a list here of things.
yeah, it's a bullet point, right?
Right, a
So
bullet point list.
you can see there isn't the same level of detail on here. So I can click read more to expand this out. Let me see what comes up. Okay, well, here's what's interesting. Wow.
Wow. This is
I
a
might have to take that
24
back.
page.
Yeah, so
This is a
okay, so if
full.
you look on the website, they're bullet points, right? So it says affordability and it just has different points. Increase the supply of affordable housing, expand access to affordable health care, guarantee universal 3K, make transportation more affordable. Okay. No real detail there. But if you click on read more, see, I was expecting more bullet points to pop up, right? But to the
This is a
contrary,
24-page PDF document.
yeah. Wow.
Um,
Although, hold on a second. Okay, it says the affordability. I thought maybe this was like his entire platform, but it's not. This 24-page document is all about affordability, it looks like.
right, because this is not his full platform. Affordability is
Right.
the first point on the issue. The next point is public safety. Then the next one is subway safety. The next one's mental health.
Yeah.
Um,
This is really detailed, actually.
he's got a ton of information here.
More than I would have expected, more than the media is talking about, more than anybody is talking about, right? And I think that needs to be questioned, emphasized. Why is it that you see all these stories on the mayor's race? They talk about the candidates. You hear about Mamdani's ideas sometimes. You don't really hear much about Cuomo's policy, yet on his website, he might have more detail than anyone.
So far, I mean, we've only looked at one other candidate,
Right. But
so
I'd be surprised to see more from, well, we'll see. But I mean, this is a lot. Like we said, 24 pages just on affordability, and there are others as well.
right, yeah. I did briefly pop over to the next one down, which was public safety, and that's another 23-page document.
Yeah. So, right off the bat, why do you think there isn't as much attention on Cuomo's ideas? Is it because these ideas aren't as controversial? Is it because the candidate and the campaign are not focusing on the ideas as much?
I don't know. Why wouldn't it, why isn't it? Maybe is it too early, you think?
But you're
Like
hearing more from the other. Maybe Zoran is doing more himself to try to put his ideas front and center. I mean, and like we said, you're not going to find Cuomo proposing government-owned grocery stores, so maybe his ideas lend themselves more to the coverage.
well, you're on the ground in New York. Is Zoran's policies or ideas being reported on widely or more than some of
Yeah,
these things?
I would definitely say more, but I think there are a few reasons for that. I'm trying to get to the bottom of it myself. I think part of it is because some of these reporters are more closely aligned with the DSA. Some of the independent or local reporters in New York City are very far left. They're very
Right.
big progressive. Sometimes they're even DSA members, and so you'll see even people complaining about that on Twitter and so forth. Like, how come you guys are covering everything this guy does? Right? It almost becomes like a joke.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like this guy unbuttons his shirt, becomes a news story. Like they're just like loving to cover this guy, and I think that's part of the reason why, because he's more aligned with their own policies, so they're promoting him. But I also think it lends itself more to the story because he is the quote unquote transformational figure in this, right? People are looking at Cuomo and maybe even some of the other candidates as establishment candidates, and
Right.
maybe you might be partial to them for their experience, right? And their leadership capabilities.
Right.
Zoran is coming at it from a different angle. He's not
Right.
the guy with the most experience as an executive or anything like that, right? He's kind of a new-ish local legislator who has these radical ideas. And so maybe that campaign lends itself to being covered in terms of the ideas more.
And he could be there could be a little bit of a extra hustle on his part,
Yeah,
being that
yeah,
underdog candidate, trying to be out there. Like and that reminds me of when the 2012 campaign, the congressional campaign, some of the other candidates who were more established, one who had served in the city council before, was complaining why you were getting more press than he was, and we were we had that hustle in there because we were an underdog campaign.
Wait. This is something that I must have forgotten. You said another candidate was complaining I was getting more press than them.
Yeah, because we were popping up in different places. We were being more creative because we didn't have the funds to do the traditional stuff, right? We couldn't spend all the money on the flyers and all this stuff, so we had to use what we knew coming from some of our background and promotion and as some of our other contacts, so we were on the New York radio, we were doing the public access stuff, we were doing a lot of YouTube and digital stuff as well. And so, we were doing meet and greets and as much as we can, even if they were small or whatever, connecting with local folks. And there was I forget what his name was. He was a former city council guy.
That would have been Alan Jennings.
I believe so. Had like, expressed a little displeasure at how, why are you getting more? Why are you getting more?
But where was this? I forget this. Was that
I,
at
I
a
don't
forum or
remember.
somewhere?
I
So he
don't
said it
remember.
to us. He complained to us that we were getting more coverage than him,
I
or he
don't
said it to
remember.
somebody else.
Yeah, I just remember that that was yeah, it had something to say, he had something to
Hmm.
say about that, and I
Interesting.
don't remember where or how it was.
Right,
Um,
right. But that's a good point because did anyone even at the time know what his policy was? You know what I mean? Like he wasn't
right,
leading with that. I think that's really the headline here, right? Like we were leading with the ideas
right,
and putting ourselves out there that way. And I think Mamdani in this race is doing that for similar reasons, right?
right.
He's the
The underdog, the
establishment,
new guy,
right? He's, exactly, and he's got
right,
to try to win people over based on what he has to offer that's different, right? He's a new
right.
guy.
Cuomo can lead with
Yeah,
his name
right.
and
His
say,
record,
okay, well, I'm Cuomo.
his name and his record, right?
Right,
The new guy has got to come in with interesting ideas that grab your attention.
right. So that could be a small part of what we're seeing here. Um, So back to these points here, we do have an incredible wealth of information on his platform and his issues. Let me see. There's another one.
Yeah. So real quick,
Subway safety is another 20-page document.
well, let's look at that next, but really quickly on affordability because we had said that a government takeover of the economy isn't the only way to address affordability. So Cuomo has some ideas here, right? Like he's talking about a 2% property tax cap, a 2% cap on state operating funds growth,
Hmm.
middle class tax relief, okay, corporate tax. So he's, at least in the beginning here, he's focusing a lot on tax relief and reduction. But he also talks about affordable housing. So he wants a $20 billion affordable housing plan. He's got, okay, more tax exemptions here, more tax. Well, a lot of this is focused on tax relief, cuts, caps, and exemptions.
Right. Which is that something that the mayor's office can get through?
That needs to be due to state largely.
Right.
So let's see here. Inflation. He's talking about inflation. Adjust
Right.
lower boundary of the mansion tax. Okay, that's interesting.
So he touches on
Oh, I
minimum
see.
wage.
That's actually a good thing. So when I said man, you read mansion tax and you think, uh, why are you focusing on people with mansions? But he makes the point here that this is old, right? So initially, the tax was for real estate transfers of $1 million or higher. So in 1989, that might have been considered the price of a mansion, but a $1 million home now in New York City is not going to be a mansion, right?
Yeah.
So it's a misnomer at this point.
Right. So it sounds like some of the policy might need to be updated with the
Right,
present day economics.
right. So yeah, there's a lot here. Let's see. Improving funding efficiency. Okay. Making strategic investment to add 3K seats. So he even mentioned in those bullet points transportation, right? I know some people might laugh
Right.
at that. Like you're talking about the affordability crisis in New York City. What does that have to do with transportation? Well, a lot. You're talking about the infrastructure and the interconnectivity of the city. It's
Absolutely.
about creating jobs in the short term, right? Because you're creating and maintaining the infrastructure, but in the long term, investment, right? Allowing people to get around quicker, maybe start a business somewhere else or um, patronize a business somewhere
Right.
else a lot easier, right? It does a
Right.
lot for the economy of the city.
Yeah, absolutely.
So he's also talking about a fare free bus pilot. Okay, so here's a similarity now between Cuomo and Mamdani. He Cuomo does talk about the pilot program, right? Which he says was a success. Now he is not, as far as I can see here, calling for completely fare free buses citywide, right? It looks like he's calling for an expansion of this pilot program, as far as I can tell.
Mhm. So you want to take a little bit, it seems like you might want to take a little bit of a tentative rollout to scale. Like
Right.
let's test it a little bit more.
It says New York City should more aggressively pursue efforts to ensure those who are eligible enroll in the program. So
Right.
probably do some more outreach to neighborhoods and let them know they can take advantage of these programs and make sure the programs persist.
Yeah.
So I guess you can summarize this as very detailed, very specific, probably less transformative in its approach, but maybe more precise almost. Like it almost seems like the previous platform we looked at was taking I don't even know, like a sledgehammer to the system, right? Or something huge, something big, right? Like let's basically throw it out or destroy it and rebuild it from the ground up. Whereas this is more like maybe doing some precise surgery with a scalpel or something, you know? Like let's identify a million different points that we need to improve and try to improve all of them marginally, maybe to create a cumulative impact as opposed to
Right.
just systemically changing everything off the bat.
Which I think is kind of more the traditional approach. And
Sure,
I think some
although
people would argue that, well, that hasn't worked so far. We might need something more
to be
transformative.
yes, philosophically I can see that, but to be fair, I think what compensates for that here is he's identifying so many areas and he's got
Yeah.
so many different points
Yeah.
here. So it isn't like he's going in saying, I've got one idea and I'm going to change this one thing a little bit. I
Right.
mean, maybe the changes might be more incremental overall, but when you do so many of them, I think it adds up.
If they get
If
done. Yeah.
if they are right, but to have basically a blueprint here, right?
Right.
Like it isn't just I've got some vague ideas or I think housing is too expensive or something like that.
Right.
He has really a blueprint of what he would want to do as mayor. And he's got, like we said, 24 pages of detail just on affordability. Then you open up the next topic and you got what, 23 more pages on public safety?
Right. And then subway
Goes-
safety, I think there was another
And it goes
20
on and
pages.
on and on. And that
Yeah.
is encouraging to see and actually surprising. That surprises me. I didn't think I would see that because I thought Cuomo as a candidate was going to play it more safe. Now, we should say maybe the policy isn't too risky or too controversial, but he still has more detail than I would expect to see given his
Right.
stature, right? I thought with such a big lead, his campaign would say we don't need to go into that level of detail because we might say something that will turn someone off, right? Like if you're a voter
Mm.
and you read through all these, or let's say you're a union or a special interest group or a lobbyist, whoever, a potential donor, anyone with an interest in this, looking at all these points, let's say there are 1,000 points on here and you agree with 990 of them, you might get stuck on those 10 points and say, I'm not going to support you anymore because of these 10 things I don't like. And
Right.
there
And
may
we see a
be
lot of
pressure
voters
then.
do that these days.
Right. Yes, there may be pressure then to give less detail, which maybe is just a shortcoming of the electoral system, right? That it works that way. But
Right.
that is a good point that you just made because I'll tell the story of when I was a candidate, I would get questionnaires from groups, organizations, unions, right? Different people. They would expect you to be aligned with them on every single thing.
Right.
And
Right. And
these
it'd be
were
these
very
massive
extensive,
lists.
yes, very extensive questionnaires, right? Which to me is like, okay, if you're the only group in the world, I can see it. But when there are 1,000 groups, each sending you like a 100-page questionnaire, it gets kind of crazy. Um, that is what they would ask. They would say, okay, here are 100 of our priorities for the upcoming year. Do you support us on all 100? And if you deviated even from maybe one or two of them, you probably weren't going to get their endorsement. Like that's what it
Right.
was. They were looking for someone to say yes 100% of the time. Um, I think it is gutsy then for Cuomo to have this level of detail. I mean, because think about it. maybe this is on the flip side a benefit of being in the lead, because with this level of detail on his website, he can't really tell these groups he's going to go with what they say on everything if he already has his position outlined, right? If it deviates, it's already on his website. He's already on record. So if they're like, oh, we want the cap to be 3%, he's like, well, I already got 2% on my website. I can't help you there.
Right, right. Well, and I think, due to his lead, due to his experience, due to his background and his name, he could basically say, listen, this is the Cuomo train. Are you going to get on board or you're not going
Right.
to get on board in
Right.
some capacity?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
He doesn't need the endorsements. He's getting them, I think, because of
right,
his front runner status, but he didn't need to beg people to come on board. He just came in, like
right,
you said, he is the train that people are jumping on. He's not trying to
right.
get them to boost him up.
So this is like I said, very detailed. There are more points as he addresses health and wellness. He addresses clean and livable city, economic development. There is one. hmm, I'm not sure how I feel about. Well, you know what? I am a little
Okay.
sure how I feel about it. The point here of combating anti-Semitism as a standalone point,
Right.
where he's bringing up this rise of anti-Semitism across the world, and I really take issue with that. Not saying that there hasn't been a rise, but this is in support of this Israel aggression against Gaza, when we're also seeing some talk in the States. But by focusing on this here, one that aligns with that genocide, two, it also is not mentioning what about this, what we're seeing right now with the migrants and this obvious racism and discrimination against uh, you know, South American, Mexican immigrants. What about what we're seeing against Black folks in the
Is there
country?
none of that on the website, or
This is
just
a
not in
this
that
is a
section?
specific section that says
Yeah.
combating anti-Semitism. I'm looking
Right.
at news stories every day about how this current administration is going to remove a lot of African American history from our museums,
Yeah.
from our organizations, and this is clearly racism and discriminatory behavior. But this is a
It
point
is.
here on
Sure.
anti-Semitism specifically
Right.
while we're looking at a genocide that's been going on for over years. So I do have
But
an issue with this being
but
highlighted.
but but let me ask you though: is there anything else in that section or on a different part of the platform that speaks to the issues that you raised? Is he
I do
omitting that
not
from this
I do not
platform?
see it.
Okay, because
I
it
do
might
not
be
see
somewhere else, and that could be valid, right? To say
right.
anti-Semitism is a problem, and so is this, right? There are more than one problem.
Right. Now if it was anti-Semitism and then there was also other,
Yeah, yeah.
section, but this is specifically highlighted.
And that is
Um,
going to be, by the way, a big difference between Mamdani and Cuomo if you're looking at their take on this particular issue, right?
I would imagine so.
Mamdani is a Muslim American and certainly more pro-Palestine than Cuomo.
Is Cuomo Jewish?
No, he's Italian, but
Italian.
I think
Okay.
he recognizes, the makeup of the city, and this maybe
Yeah.
maybe why he's more electable. New York City, I believe, is about 15% Jewish now. We
I
can look at those
believe
numbers.
it's the largest Jewish population outside of Israel.
Right,
Yeah.
right, and
So
so
yeah, that is a
there are
big
differences between the candidates.
yeah, that will be a big difference, especially this point here. Um,
So, okay, are you seeing anything else on a Cuomo platform that stands out to you that's surprising to you? I know one of the things that he's pushing for is more police on the street, which can be controversial, and that's not Zoran's approach.
I didn't see that, but yeah, that can be controversial because, you know, it needs to the police departments need to be cleaned up, not just throw more at them. I think there's a couple of things. Don't not just throw more police at something, but I think the police need to have some things taken off of their plate so that they
Right.
can focus more on what they are actually trained to do and alleviate some of what people, put on their shoulders.
And that is
Um,
something that Zoran was calling for, which actually,
but I think he does call a
oh,
little bit for that too in different
right. I was
ways.
going to say, if you look at his entire PDF here, because he goes into so much detail, there's probably something more than just the headline, which,
Right.
is
Sure,
what we
sure.
were trying to tease out with this episode, right? You see the headlines and you see what the big stories are, but let's actually dive deeper into what they're calling for. I did see an article maybe last week or so that Zoran was pushing for some of the things that we had talked about in previous campaigns and what you had just mentioned, right? To help the police departments focus on what they are trained and what they should be doing. You want
Right,
to potentially create other avenues, or other either it's going to be other agencies or just other possibilities of dealing with other types of issues that
right,
don't necessitate a law enforcement response every single time.
right.
So that is something that was part, I know, of Zoran's platform. I'm sure, though, if we dive deep into Cuomo's platform, you're going to see something on that
Well,
aside from just
I see
more
a
power.
section on mental health, addiction, and homelessness, which
Yeah.
I think can affect that um, as well, and then health and wellness types of things. So I think some of those things will affect that, but I don't see anything that specifically um, mentions anything about law enforcement.
Well, let's see. Let's do a little search of his PDF here because I would want to see more nuance on this particular topic. And with a 23-page PDF on public safety, there's certainly room to have some nuance here, right?
Yeah, I would think so. Um,
I'm seeing prevention and enforcement, subway safety. That's a big one. But what is his solution to it? He's saying hire 500 more uniformed officers to patrol the subways and buses.
Wait, what is this?
Okay.
Is this something new or is this something? New York has an all crimes DNA database.
A lot of this is talking about what he did as governor, raise the
So
age.
could could some of this data, this extensive data, be inflated with past achievements to make
Oh,
it look a little bit more impressive
sure. Although I
instead of
think it's fair game.
platform?
I think it's fair game because look,
Sure.
this is his platform. So part of it is going to be this is what I did in the past, and this is how I want to build on that, right? So
Right.
I think by putting it in the platform, he's at least insinuating that he wants to continue these initiatives, right? Maybe adapt them somehow to the state level, to the city level, right? Or continue to push for them at the state level, right? They wouldn't be in his
Right.
platform if he didn't agree with pursuing them further now, I wouldn't think.
Sure, sure, sure. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
we're looking at the
Yeah.
volume of pages,
Right.
and this could be adding to it because of showing past stuff instead of all points on what
Instead
he'd
of
like.
all new stuff. But you know
Right.
what? As a voter, I want to see more than just new
Oh,
stuff.
sure,
I do
sure.
want to see the record too. Let's not get it twisted, right? It's not. I'm
Oh,
not
yeah.
looking for someone to just have ideas and nothing to back it up. It's nice to have ideas backed up by the record and say, this is
Yeah.
what I've been able to do in the past. This is how I want to build on it. And I think that is Cuomo's strength.
So, all right.
He does have a list of bullet points here. I'm on page 11 on this PDF.
Yeah.
It
The public
says,
safety.
yeah, he would implement a comprehensive plan to make New York safer. The foundational strategies of this plan include the following. And now he's got the bullet points. So he's talking about increasing the size of the police force by 15%, 5,000 officers. And that's something that's a little controversial for some.
Absolutely.
Restore subway safety. Okay, but that's vague. But earlier on, he said, again, more officers on the
There's
subway.
a few vague things here.
Yes. But in other sections of the PDF, I think there's a little bit more detail as to how he intends to address these.
Yeah. So, like, use innovative
Right.
technology to make the city safer is very vague. It
But
doesn't
yeah,
really
is he
say.
talking about the Eric Adams robot dogs and what he's talking about? What innovative technology?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and
For subway
even here,
safety.
he's a little bit more specific, but it's still kind of vague, where he says reform discovery laws and provide resources to prosecutors for compliance, press for judges to utilize the full extent of their discretion for recidivist cases. But what I guess that is kind of the reform he's looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So is a little bit more specific in that regard.
And to be fair, all of this is really more specific than you need to be as a candidate for office, right? Because details tend to get ironed out through the legislative process. There's a lot of compromise that goes into it. Like we mentioned, a lot of people work on these. You don't unilaterally enact any of these policies. And so
Right.
you come in with the big idea, right? You
Right.
want more safety in these areas. And then you sit down at the negotiating table with a lot of other actors who are coming in with their own interests, and there's funding issues, personnel issues, different things. Different people have different input, and none of these plans really end up exactly the way you envision them, if you even envision them to that level of detail in the first place, right? That's like
Sure.
making the sausage. That's the nitty gritty of government. So
Sure.
usually as a candidate, you speak in broader strokes. You don't usually go into this level of detail. So even though we
Sure.
as
Sure.
people who are studying it and trying to get all the details out of it, maybe we're saying, oh, how would you exactly do X, Y, and Z? I think from a campaign perspective, there already is more detail here than you would need or expect.
Yeah, and yeah, I'm not knocking the volume of it. I think we want, you know, our last poll was about, more about substance, and like he's giving this is like 100 pages
Right,
already
right.
of stuff.
And a third of the voters were like, nah, no, no more.
Yeah. So,
So, okay. Okay. Listen, I'm learning something just by doing this. Like I said, this is a lot more detail than I would have expected.
right. Just a quick update on that poll.
Yeah.
We're up to 78% said yes, campaigns should focus more on policy ideas. 22% are on the no side. So,
Okay.
yeah.
All
All
right.
right.
So we'll
So
see how it ends up at
next.
the end of the show. So let's briefly then look at some of the other major candidates. We're not going to have time to go through everything, but let's see if we can get a sense at least of what policy they're proposing and how much detail they have. Now, I'm curious. Do
All
you
right.
think anyone else is going to have this level of detail on
I
their
don't
site?
think so. I think,
I don't think so.
Cuomo's got more of an experience and track record, but plus he's probably got a bigger team than everybody else.
I
Like
was
he's
going to posit that as well. I mean, do you think he wrote that himself, or he just said,
no.
write me, write me some policy?
There's no way he sat down and wrote 100 pages himself. No.
Right. But to
But
have that level of detail, he had to have a lot of input. I doubt he was just like make up 100 pages of stuff and then hold me to it. He had to be going in there and saying, this is what I want.
right, they probably sat down and had strategy sessions, and he's
Yeah.
like, "This, I think this needs to be done. This needs to be fixed." And someone took the notes, and then they put together this document of it. So
So,
yeah, which is
you know what
how
I would
teams
like to
work.
see? What I would like to see Cuomo do, and I'm picking on him because he hasn't been known thus far as the ideas candidate.
Mm,
Maybe he doesn't want to be, but then again, he's got all this detail on the site, right? If he wants that to be more front and center, I would like to see press conferences. Maybe
mm,
once the petitioning is final, right? They had to be submitted. So once the ballot is all made up, press conferences around some of these ideas. Anthony
mm.
Weiner did that when he ran for mayor. I thought it was effective. He called it the keys to the city. But he's got all these PDFs on his site. Make them
Right,
come to life. Even I saw on
right.
one of them, the public safety one has some charts. It was like levels
Yeah.
of complaints over the years going up and down. And so you
Right,
can visualize it. Imagine blowing that up as a graphic, right? Having a
right.
press conference and talking about point by point what he wants to do in that particular area and having the reporters ask questions on it, follow ups. I mean, that's, I think, one way to bring these ideas front and center and bring them to life.
Sure. And even each one of these sections um could be individual videos for video content for his
Right.
promotions and campaigns to give some of this in a visual way.
Right.
Because most people are not going to sit down and read 100 pages worth of stuff.
Right.
But they might watch a 5 minute video that has, a lot of this info.
Right.
So he's got a lot of content here, which is I think is a good thing. It's a good thing.
Yeah. All right. So I'm on Brad Lander. He is one of the other major candidates, Lander for mayor. So the website is landerfornyc.com. And I'm going to do the same thing, right? We're going to click on the issues on the site. If you notice, these sites are all designed to look very similar. Have you noticed that? They kind of look the same. All the
Um,
sites that we looked at.
it's the colors, right?
The color and the style, yeah, the way it's laid out. You got the about section, your endorsement section, your issue section. I mean, I guess that's standard for campaigns, but it's kind of funny how they're in competition with each other, but they're all kind of making the same thing.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
All right, so I'm on issues, and he does seem to have a separate page for issues, Brad Lander. And let's see, is he leading with affordability? Because we saw Cuomo and Mamdani lead on affordability. It looks like if you go to his issues page, it's the second thing. He says safer first.
Yeah.
right? So he's got those
Safer, more
columns,
affordable, and better
better
run.
run, right? So that's his tagline: safer, more affordable, and better run. So he's breaking it up into these three categories. Safer first. Now that's interesting if you think about it from an ideological perspective. I know Lander is one of these candidates who has been known to be progressive, kind of flirting with the DSA, I guess, at times. But now that he's running for mayor, he's seen as trying to moderate his image a little bit. And I think he's maybe getting lost in this now because some people have found it hard to get a read on him. Where does he stand today as a candidate for mayor as compared to these other candidates? I think if you look at the moderate lane, Cuomo is kind of like the juggernaut there. If you look at the progressive lane, Mamdani is really taking up that space. So where does that leave some of these other guys, right? Some of these other
Right.
candidates. Lander, I think, has struggled with that. Interesting to see him define. Maybe it's a subtle thing, but he's defining himself in terms of safety before affordability. Now
Mm.
that might make him look more of a moderate, right? More to the right, even of someone like Cuomo, who's focusing on affordability. But that's just very high level because when you get into the details of it, Cuomo is talking about things like tax caps, which keep him in that moderate space.
Right. And then, I believe safety has been a big topic in New York over the past couple of
Sure,
years. So it,
sure.
kind of makes sense. What's interesting to me, just is standing out, first of all, high level,
Yeah,
he does seem to have a lot of information on his policy, a lot of details. A lot of these go to different pages. So, he's not slouching on giving info on his platform.
right.
Um, in the safety category.
Mm-hmm.
One of the points is stand up to Donald Trump as part of the
As
safety
part of
platform.
safety. So let's click on that. That's interesting.
So that's kind of interesting to me. That's what stood out. I'm like, this is in the safety area.
Well, so if you click on it, it says, as Donald Trump and Elon Musk threaten our neighbors and our services, Brad will bring New Yorkers together and stand up for women, the LGBTQ community, workers, our immigrant neighbors, people of color, Jews, Muslims, or any other New Yorkers subjected to hate or attack. So
I
that's
like that message.
that's how he's tying it to safety.
Right. And I like that message. And this is
It's
what,
more inclusive sounding.
to me, it's more inclusive
Yeah,
sounding versus what we just saw on Cuomo's, where it was anti-Semitism here.
yeah,
This, Lander here is like, listen, all New Yorkers here, like everyone is, women, LGBTQ, Jews, Muslims, everybody. We want to
right.
get rid of that hate in all forms. To me, this is I
It's
like
funny.
this.
That reminds me actually though of the speech that Andrew Cuomo gave when I was in Albany. He gave a speech right outside my office at the time, and I took video of it
Mm,
where he used some of that same rhetoric, and he actually was going at Trump back when Trump was running the first time, and he
mm,
was saying, "You don't know what makes us great. This is what makes us great." And he had that inclusive messaging. He was like, "Look at New York. It's everyone." He was like, "It's
right.
Christians." Jews, Muslims, all together, whites, Latinos, blacks, Asians, all
Sure.
together. And that was his messaging of inclusivity, right? Of diversity. He said, we don't demonize our differences. We celebrate our differences in New York. That's what makes us New York. That's what makes us a great place. And that's good messaging. You're not seeing, I guess, that message to that degree on Cuomo's current website, right? As
Right.
just not from the look that we just took at it. You're seeing
Right.
more of that really in Lander's rhetoric on his site.
Right. And in this safety section, it actually is addressed a couple of different ways. The stand up to Donald Trump. The next point is fight hate and harassment. And
Mm-hmm.
then another point, stand up for our immigrant neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
So he's really going into that inclusive, diverse New Yorker point here.
He calls the Adams administration's shelter limit policies cruel.
Mm,
It's funny, probably because I think I saw some of this on the other websites as well. They're criticizing the Adams administration because it seems like when these websites were made, they thought they were running against Eric Adams, and he's not even in
right.
the primary anymore. So he's kind of irrelevant at this point, even though he is still the incumbent mayor. So it is
Right. Yeah.
their
Yeah.
game to contrast what you would do differently from the current mayor. But it's just funny because I think they wrote
Yeah.
this thinking he was going to be their main opponent.
Yeah. Cuomo's your opponent now, buddy.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right,
So
so do we see anything here specific that we can point out quickly and say, well, that's different from what we just saw on the other websites?
I think a lot of it seems to be hitting on the same points. That like, the only difference I see is this more inclusive message here. Lander's also talking about guaranteed child care, housing issues, mental health care, public transit work. Um,
He is being more vague. I'm just clicking. Even when you click on read more on these, you're not getting the 25-page PDF or anything.
no, they're like 30
Yeah.
second video clips.
Right. And then you're getting a paragraph that's still vague. And honestly, this is the level of detail I would normally expect to see from a campaign. Although I feel like the others that we saw kind of raised the bar. So now when you look at these, you're like, maybe they should have more at this point. Because what are you really getting? And especially from someone like him who needs to define himself more. We talked about how his brand kind of got lost in the mix in this race. So how do you combat that? You
Now
know what I mean?
there's a mix here actually.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, if you go to the stand up to Donald Trump, right? It's about, there's like a one or two sentence paragraph description here. And then
Yeah.
there's a 33-second video from
Right.
Brad out in the street talking, which is a personal touch. I kind of like
Sure.
that. Then
Sure.
you click the plus sign and there's Brad's record and there's
I
another
see that. The
two
plus. Okay,
short paragraphs.
that's
I
bad
wouldn't have
design.
hid that. I
That's
wouldn't have
bad
hid
design.
that.
That's hard to find. It's Brad's
Right.
record. Yeah, that plus sign's all the way on the right side of the screen. That's
Right.
not the
It's gonna be
most
missed.
visible.
It's
Yeah.
gonna be missed.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have done that. But there was another point here. Not everything is set up exactly the same. Not all of them have video clips.
Mhm.
There was one, I just saw it and I can't remember it right now. Jesus, can't find the point. But one did lead to a PDF
Okay.
for more information. It said Brad's solution. It was a big button underneath. So some of them have a big button
Okay.
underneath the point that says Brad's solution. You click on it and it gives you more information. And this was like a 3-page PDF on it. Um,
Okay.
where did I see that, for example?
See, a lot of what I'm looking at. Okay, here's a Brad solution. If you click on
Which
lead
one?
with public integrity,
Okay, yeah, there
it
we
looks
go.
vague. So it takes you to the first page is vague. It takes you to a second page, which also looks vague. It
Right.
says fight corruption, increase transparency, media accessibility. Okay, but what exactly do you want? Now you click on Brad's solution, and what do you get? You get a PDF. This is a 4-page PDF.
Right. With more
Stop,
information.
stop the corruption. Stop the corruption. It's got an introduction. It lays out the issue, and it says Brad's solution. But the solution, though, hold on.
I think
Okay.
there's a
No, there's
little
a lot
bit
here.
too
There is
much.
a lot here. There is a lot here. I see
There's a
it.
lot there, but I think there's a little bit too much work to get to it.
Get to it. Yep, you're right. You're right.
You
Why
know,
Brad?
because on that same page,
Yeah.
there is Brad's record, and that's hidden underneath the plus sign thing, like the other one. That's
Right.
like three things there, and then there's the Brad solution PDF, which has the 4 pages, which is good, but give us a little bit more of that on this main page, so you don't lose people trying to send them somewhere else.
Right. Right. And why provide this level of detail if you're going to bury it like 5 clicks into your website?
Right. Yeah. So, but he is giving extra detail in some of these.
On some areas, right?
Yeah,
Which is good.
which is
I
good.
still think not as much substance here as the others necessarily. Although maybe more than the now that I'm thinking of it,
Well, it could be like if you
maybe
go to
right on balance, right? Because the first website was the Zohran website, and he had kind of bold ideas, but he didn't have the level of detail that Cuomo did. Maybe Lander is somewhere in the middle here, in that
right.
maybe his ideas are a little bit more ambitious in some cases than Cuomo's, and doesn't quite have the detail, but maybe he's got more detail than Zamdani does. And
Right.
Mamdani
But he
does.
might have about similar to Cuomo. It's just it seems to
Yeah,
be
but there's not a Brad solution on every point here, right? It's only
not
four.
on every point,
Yeah,
but that's what I mean. It's kind of scattered, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
he's like, for example, if you go to protect workers' rights, as one of his points
Uh-huh.
here, there is a Brad solution there, and that's an 11-page PDF.
Okay.
So we're starting to, if we've got enough of these, we're going to hit that 100-page mark that Cuomo's doing as well. It's just scattered and
It's
not
more
as
scattered
up.
and harder to find, I guess.
You have to work for it a little
And
bit
work,
more.
yeah, you got to work for his policy. And that's a problem for him, right? Maybe
Right.
it's a microcosm for his campaign. You have to work to find out where he really stands and who he is
Right.
in this
Right.
particular race, right? As far as him not getting lost amongst these other candidates. Because you
Right.
have several candidates now, and you also have ranked choice voting. So voters are going to have the chance to vote for more than one person. They're going to pick up to five people in this
Right.
Democratic primary. So these candidates really need to be defining themselves and giving
Right.
voters a reason to even rank them on their ballot, right? Let's say you're going to be doing Cuomo or Zohran for one or two. What about three, four, and five? You know what I mean?
Right.
Why should I, as a voter, choose Lander over Stringer or Blake or any of these other candidates? So, like we said, we're not going to have time to go through all of them. We can do a quick look at Stringer and see. This way, we'll have
Right.
four and kind of calibrate that way, right? Try to figure out what we think of in terms of the four issues pages, right? Who is
Right.
providing the most, and maybe even whose ideas do we seem to agree with more? So let's see, Stringer for mayor.
Scott Stringer for
Google.
Scott
So his
Stringer
site is yeah,
NYC.com.
Scott Stringer. Also, notice that a bunch of these are just their name, NYC.com. So even the URLs are similar.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Gotta make
again,
it.
look at this. Same. Okay, I'm colorblind, so maybe I shouldn't say same color. It looks very similar to me. I think his is more purple than the other one that we just saw, right?
Wait, did you say you're colorblind?
Yeah, you didn't know that?
Since when?
I've always been.
I never knew that.
Yeah, I'm not completely colorblind. It's not like I see in black and white, but the shades of the different colors, I have a hard time differentiating. So this I see as a little bit more purple than the last one, but it looks very similar to
It's
the
deep
Lander
blue.
color scheme. Is blue? Okay, so there you go.
Yeah, this is a deep
I
blue.
would have called it purple, but there you go.
Yeah, this is a deep blue. This is okay, very clean. Um Scott's plan. So his platform is listed as Scott's plan.
Okay, full disclosure here, I do represent the political firm that did his petition work.
Okay.
Let's click on
So he's also
Scott's
got so
plan.
Scott's plan.
Okay. Now, you
Um
notice one thing also that's maybe subtle. They like using their first name, right? Brad's solution, Scott's plan. All right. They're trying to be folksy. They're trying to be relatable. Let's, just call me Scott.
Right. He's got so he's doing the PDF extensive PDFs here. The first one is about it's about a 5 page, another one's a 12 pager. The one on housing is 7 pages. And it's very text heavy, so there's a lot of information here.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just like 7 pages and most of it's taken up by images. Like these seem to be like, data heavy reports here.
He's got something called the Robin Hood housing plan, reclaiming neglected properties from irresponsible landlords and converting them into affordable housing for families. Robin Hood.
Yeah, I wonder
That's
how
that
that,
image of taking from the rich and giving to the poor.
yeah, I wonder how that how popular that will be.
Well, I'm still not seeing anything
They're talking about
too
using eminent domain to seize properties from
too
landlords.
transformative. So, all right, what is he leading with? Public safety and quality of life. So he's not leading with affordability.
That was the top one. Yes, public safety and quality of life, and that
That's
includes
interesting because I'm scrolling
rebuilding and
down.
repurposing.
I don't see affordability as a major section on this site at all. He must have it somewhere else if it's even on here.
Well, the first point in that public safety and quality of life is about hiring more police officers.
Yeah, but I'm talking about affordability. Is affordability even highlighted anywhere on his issues page?
Not on its own point.
All right, I'm
Um,
scrolling down. I don't see anything. It does say affordable childcare for families, so maybe it's collapsed into some of these other points.
I think housing is the only one where it seems like it's
Yeah,
kind of hinting at
yeah.
that.
So right
Uh,
off the bat, I mean, so that's something like if you think it more high level before we start
right.
digging deeper into the finer points of the policy, what are they saying philosophically? What is their main focus or priority going to be? Maybe you shouldn't read into it too much, but I think it's somewhat telling that some of these other candidates had affordability front and center. That was the first thing you saw when you clicked on their issues. When you
Right.
click on this one, it's not
It's
here. It's really nowhere to be
right.
found.
Yeah, this
But
is
he does
public.
lead with public safety.
But his public safety, the first 2 points, is more about NYPD and hiring more officers.
But if you click on read more, a 12-page PDF comes up. So you do have
Yeah,
a lot of detail here as well.
it's still police heavy. The first point is closing staffing gaps, recruitment and retention for NYPD. Um,
They do have
which
mental health support though,
yeah,
but that's for the officers. It says
I don't know
expand
if it's
counseling, stress management, and peer support resources to safeguard officer well-being. But what about a mental health response? One of the plans, and I think it was Mamdani's plan, one of the candidates, I think it was him, they were saying the line that you can call now to get a mental health response should
hmm,
be expanded to include emergency situations as well. So right now you can call that in New York City if you want a mental health response, but it's limited to non-emergency. So currently, if it's an emergency, you're still going to get the police, right? He wants to expand it to give someone the option of calling that same line even in an emergency situation.
you know what, I'm leaning towards I think that's a good idea because we've seen so many cases where police show up for a mental health crisis and we've seen people end up dead or hurt
Yeah,
because that's
they're
not
not
what police
equipped
are
for it.
trained for,
Not trained for it. Yeah.
you know. And so, I think that could be, of course, details matter on how it's implemented and whatnot, but it sounds like a good idea. I do like what I do like here in Scott's plan is this attempt to attack ethics and corruption.
Mm-hmm. And that
I don't know if you've
probably
seen that.
builds on his work as comptroller, right? When he was
Right,
the controller of New York City, he was tasked with overseeing the pensions and also looking into the contracts, right? He would have to sign off on city contracts.
right,
Um, a focus of his was looking at corruption. For example, we had encountered some very bloated contracts that were being passed around, and we thought there's no way that these services should require this amount of funding. What's going on? And to his
right,
credit, we would bring it to Scott Stringer's attention when he was controller, and he would look at it and he would say, "Look, I'm going to launch an investigation. This doesn't pass the sniff test. We're going to find out what's really going on here." And so I think it makes sense now to include that as part of his mayoral platform. He's done some of the groundwork
right,
as controller, though as controller, you don't have a whole lot of authority. I mean, you do have the ability to approve or reject contracts, but what ended up happening to him when he was controller is COVID hit, and the mayor said, we're going to jam all these contracts through on an emergency basis, regardless of what the controller is saying, because we're in a pandemic and, we've got to take action here. And so he really kind of lost any ability to do anything, even though he's probably finding a lot of corruption. He
right,
was stuck, right? His hands were tied. And so I do like that he is saying, if you elect me mayor, I'm going to build on some of that work I did as controller and maybe now
right.
really expose it and do something about it.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I like, as far as I like that this is included, that there's a focus on ethics and corruption, and as he puts it here, reclaiming City Hall. And some
Right.
of the points here, I think, are very. A lot of people have called for over the years, not just at city levels, but even in government levels, like restricting lobbying by former city officials and preventing agencies from hiring lobbyists who previously lobbied them. A
Right.
lot of people for years have had issues with that type of revolving door, and so for that to be part of a platform, I do like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, like we said,
This
we're not
might
going
set
to
him apart a little bit from the other three that we've seen so far.
Right, right. And like we said, we're not going to have time to go through all these extensively, especially seeing that there is more detail than we might have expected on these
Yeah,
sites. And I think the question coming out of all this is, why isn't it talked about a lot? I mean, I read articles
yeah,
about the mayor's race every day. I'm seeing stories all the time. You're not getting the differences in the policies or the ideas or the
right,
philosophies. And I think that's part of why some of these candidates are still polling in the single digits because no one knows what they stand for as compared to the others, right?
and
Just seeing Cuomo and now Mamdani because he's the progressive alternative, I guess, right? But there are a lot of candidates running. Like we said, people can vote for up to five of them, so it doesn't just matter picking one.
right, and I think that that plays off of the poll that we had last week, and I think that could lead into the poll for this
Right.
week.
Absolutely. So let's do that. Let's put this out to the people And then we'll get a final count, final tally on the poll that we've been looking at, right? Our poll from last week. So the poll for this coming week is, do you perform your own independent research on candidates' policy proposals before voting?
Yeah, because listen, if the people following the New York City race this year do their own research, there's obviously a wealth of information that they can go through
Right.
that I think is a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. I want to see it covered more. There was a
Right.
website called I Stand With. I'm not sure if they have it for the mayor's race this
I
year,
remember
but you
something
would
like
get
that.
that a lot for the presidential candidates and probably even the congressional Senate candidates. I would like to see something like that for this mayor's race where they can ask a voter detailed questions on what their beliefs are on a variety of issues and then come back with, well, based on these candidates' websites, you are 78% in alignment with Scott Stringer and 75
Right.
with Brad Lander or whatever. That could be useful.
I remember that. Do they still do that site? Because I
The
remember
site
the
does still exist. I don't know, like I said, if they're doing this mayor's race. We can take a look at it.
yeah. Um,
Yeah.
so
So, I mean, if not, that's something that someone should be doing, I think. I think it's a good service.
sure, sure. That would definitely it takes a lot to
It
do,
does. It
but
does. But the information does seem to be out there now. It isn't like you're just speculating based on what you think their brands are. I mean, you can really
right.
go in on the policy they're posting to their websites. And to me, that's my biggest takeaway from this episode. There is a lot
Yeah.
more information on these platforms than you might think. And if you really
Right.
are interested in which candidates are more aligned with your own values and beliefs, I think
Yeah.
that information is there. You just have to dig for it.
Right.
Unfortunately, in some cases, you got to dig a little deeper than you might want, right? Like
Right.
some of these finer points are like 5 or 6 clicks into the candidate site.
Right. And I think um one of the things that we could also bring up as a point here is like the candidates are largely doing a lot of work for what we've called for as far as giving some transparency or even explaining their platforms.
Mhm.
Media could be failing
Yep.
to educate the public on this wealth of information that's out there.
Right.
Um,
Think about
so
that, right? Yeah, I agree. Because you see articles on different issues, right? Like who's funding whose campaign or whatever. What about some articles on the differences between candidates on housing and just
yeah.
kind of have sections on what they're each calling for on that issue, right? I mean, I think
Right.
that's a very useful kind of article and information to put out to people.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Well, do we have a bottom line on all this? I think we kind of
Before we get to the bottom line, we
drove
get the
at it.
final update on
All
this
right.
poll.
Let's do it.
So the poll was, do you believe that candidates and campaigns should focus more on policy ideas than they
Mhm.
currently do? And so our updated count now is a 77% yes, 23% no.
Okay.
Um, and there is a comment here that says, I think we should focus on policy, but keep it short and pithy, such as we will restore and expand Social Security. We need more renewable energy investments, wage peace,
Wow.
especially in Gaza, and most workers should make a living wage. But these don't give any detail. Those
Right.
are
And
all
those are
very,
also points that almost all the candidates are going to make, especially if you're in a primary where it isn't
yeah,
like you have major philosophical or ideological differences. I mean, in some cases, you might, like with Cuomo, Mamdani in some areas, but generally speaking, right, these candidates are going to be pretty much aligned in their beliefs. And so I think you need some more detail to be able to discern where the differences lie.
right. Yeah. So I agree with that. And I think we are, at least with the candidates we've looked at, we are kind of seeing that they're giving more detail.
At
So
least on their websites, right?
on these
But
on their
we'll see,
websites.
we'll see what they do when they're at, when they're in campaign mode, right? Is it going to be
Right.
all about rhetoric, even when they debate? Because there are debates almost every night, especially as you get closer to the primary. There's going to be
Right.
a ton of these different forums. Are they giving that level of detail? Do they even know? Because, like we pointed out, it's very likely they have other people writing these PDFs for them. Do
Right.
they know their own platform to that level of detail?
Right. Right.
So,
So,
all right. Well,
yeah.
bottom line, give us a bottom line.
Bottom line, I think bottom line could be 2 points here. A lot of times in campaigns, people are complaining about, we don't know where the candidate stands. We didn't know this and that. We want more detail. And we, as what we've seen tonight, there is, at least in this race so far, from what we've seen from these candidates, there is more detail. So that means there is a responsibility on the candidates to put these things front and center in their public discourse. There is a responsibility on the media to make sure that these views and these points are represented in their reporting, and there's a responsibility on the voting public to go and do that research because the information is out there. So,
Yeah, I agree with that. And of course, people can find us wherever podcasts are available. We're also on YouTube in video form, and we have polls posted on Daily Coast. And you can find us on Instagram and Reddit as well. So it's Nuance Show, Nuance with
and
myself
Facebook
and Jake Potter. Facebook now, right? We got the Facebook group going. So
at Nuance Show.
yeah, hit us up there. Um, Join the conversation, right? We want to hear from you. We want to get your thoughts on all of these issues and more. As always, we've got work to do. We thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.